and welcome back to the Health Longevity Secrets Show with your host, Dr. Robert Lufkin. His book titled Lies I Taught in Medical School is a New York Times bestseller. And now please enjoy this week's episode where we explore the advantages of fasting with Dr. Valter Longo.
This week, we look at the secrets to a longer, healthier life in our exclusive conversation with Dr. Valter Longo, a pioneer in longevity and healthy eating. Embark on Dr. Longo's incredible journey from his transformative experiences with Dr. Roy Walford at UCLA to his groundbreaking research on fasting. Discover how periodic fasting and fasting-mimicking diets can reset our metabolism, and learn about how his innovative summer mode and winter mode eating patterns can revolutionize our diet. Ever wondered how fasting stacks up against the ketogenic diet, especially in the fight against cancer? Dr. Longo shares fascinating insights on the metabolic wonders of fasting, the challenges of water-only fasting trials, and the development of the fasting-mimicking diet. We talk about the fasting-mimicking diet and its impressive health benefits without the extreme effects of ketosis. We learn about its meticulously designed macronutrient composition and its role in clinical trials for conditions like diabetes, cancer, and autoimmunity. Dr. Longo's commitment to health, longevity, and charitable causes shines through as he underscores the potential of these dietary strategies to transform lives. Don't miss this enlightening episode filled with actionable insights for a healthier future. This episode is sponsored by xxx-Is Health. One of the most common questions I get asked is which blood tests I check myself on a regular basis. Well, I check 17 biomarkers, but the secret is I'm able to do everything from the convenience of my home. I collect a sample with just a simple finger stick like this. You don't need to be a doctor to do it. Then I just mail it in and wait for the results. xxx Health makes it possible. Use the link below to get 15% off. This episode is brought to you by L-Nutra, maker of the Prolong Fasting Mimicking Diet. If you'd like to try it, use the link in the show notes for 20% off. This episode is sponsored by American Heart Technologies, maker of Vendus, the only FDA-cleared, fully automated, operator-independent, non-invasive, easy-to-use, office-based device for measurement of vascular reactivity and endothelial function. I'm excited about this new technology as it is essentially a non-invasive way to evaluate the endothelial dysfunction at the root of major chronic diseases such as hypertension, diabetes, heart attack, stroke, and Alzheimer's that we talk about so often on this program. See the link in the show notes for special access. And now, please enjoy this week's episode. Valter Longo is currently professor of biogerontology and biological sciences and director of the Institute of Longevity at the School of Gerontology at USC Los Angeles. He's also director of oncology and the longevity program in Milan. Professor Longo is also the scientific director of the Create Cures Foundation and the Valter Longo Foundation. Now, let's jump right in. Hi, Valter. Thanks for coming on the program.
Well, thanks for having me.
I apologize. My voice is a little hoarse today, but it's fortunately my throat's not sore. But I'm so excited about today talking about all things with caloric restriction and fasting and the benefits of it and how we can approach it. But before we do that, I thought I'd reference a little bit of your origin story. I think we both worked with Dr. Roy Walford at UCLA. Our paths crossed there. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, so I actually started my my PhD in Roy's lab at UCLA. He was in the pathology department, and so I joined the pathology. I was first in biochemistry, then I switched to pathology and spent 2 years in Roy's lab. And when I first joined, he actually was in Biosphere 2. He was doing the first human clinical study on calorie restriction. and him and other 7 people in Biosphere 2, which was this enclosed environment in Arizona, in the Arizona desert. And so, yeah, so that was a very interesting experience. I ended up only staying 2 years and then moving back to the biochemistry department because I think, it was the explosion of the genetics of aging era. And Roy wasn't really, it was not a very molecular lab. And so I think back in the biochemistry lab, I think we got a lot more accomplished in the genetics of age, at least. But I learned a lot with Roy and his team, and they were all focused on calorie restriction and the effect of calorie restriction on aging and health.
So what is it? Dr. Walford was an expert on caloric restriction, and you've continued that work on and expanded it to become one of the leading authorities in your own right in this area. So what is it about caloric restriction that's healthy? I would think, if you stop eating and don't have calories, that's bad because you starve to death. So what's going on there?
Yeah, so actually, Walford, Roy was working in the whole lab on calorie restriction, and calorie restriction refers to, for humans, about 20% reduction in calories below the normal level. And but since I was at the Biosphere 2 when they came out, and they looked terrible. And so I think that was the day where I thought, I'm never going to work on calorie restriction, right? Everybody thinks I work on calorie restriction, but I never worked on calorie restriction. And I always thought, how do we get this without this obvious restriction, this very severe restriction, which nobody's going to do, and so at first the genetics made sense, and so we keep still working on the genetics of aging, right? So eventually we can target the genes, and but then it was also, what if we just fast for a brief period, right? And then go back to the normal diet for a long period, right? So a long period on normal diet and a brief period on a totally fasted state. And that's what I worked on. And so I somewhat pioneered that. People were before me were doing, before what we do in the lab, we were doing like long fasting periods, like weeks, right? Or they were doing calorie restriction, or they were doing this, 14 hours, 16 hours of daily fast, right? So I just introduced this idea of what if you, once a month to once every 4 months or 6 months, have this brief 4, 5, 6, 7 days of fasting. First started with water only fasting, and then moved to fasting mimicking diets. And so, and then, as you start doing science, you realize that fasting means nothing, and calorie restriction means nothing, and it's about what exactly are you doing and to whom, right? And so the same thing, it could be very beneficial to somebody and very bad for somebody else, right? So I think that's what I like to sort of fuse the FDA mentality with the Walford mentality and say, okay, how do we come up with things that actually can make it to mainstream medicine and be respected and be standardized and help people still using some of the ideas that Roy had, which is plant-based, diet, right? Like a plant-based diet. So yeah, can we use a plant-based diet to then, let's say, coming from the longevity zones of the world, and you combine it with fasting to help people and standardize it and do clinical trials, randomized clinical trials, and then to help people stay healthy longer. Yeah. And so sorry for the long answer, but I thought that I had to sort of introduce this idea, because otherwise, we just use words and that are meaningless. Yeah. So in this particular use of fasting and fasting mimicking diet, what's happening, two clear things are happening. One is resetting metabolism and the metabolic state of a person, right? Why? Well, probably we come from a long history of what I call summer mode and winter mode. So in the summer mode, you eat a lot of fruit and you eat a lot of honey and nuts and whatever it's available, and you become insulin resistant and potentially even become obese, right? This still happens for the emperor penguins of the South Pole. So you get all this fat, you accumulate it, because at some point you're going to face the winter, where you're gonna switch from insulin resistance to insulin sensitivity, and then you burn that fat. So that's one thing that clearly the fasting, these days of fasting, and it's necessary to undergo days of fasting. That's one thing that it does. Switch from this summer mode to the winter mode. Fat accumulating insulin resistant, fat burning insulin sensitive. Then clearly it takes several days for autophagy and all this multi-system. It's not just autophagy. Autophagy is just one of the many things that are occurring, but it's shrinking. So individuals, the Ansel Keys back in the days had done these experiments on humans showing that people in semi-starvation, eventually they shrink, right? And all the organs shrink. And then when they refeed, they re-expand, right? So that's this shrinking part is associated with a lot of clearing of cells and junk material. And so that's another important thing. And then 3 is what we see is, turning on of stem cells. And then in multiple systems, and we see this very clearly in mice and rats. And we're pretty sure it's happening also in people. And then reprogramming of cells into a more, you see these Yamanaka factors, these factors that are involved in sort of resetting the youth of a cell, right? And making it an embryonic like stem cell. So we see this Yamanaka factor go up, different Yamanaka factors in different cell types, and then the stem cell get activated, right? So these are some of the things that we see during this particular fasting mimicking diet intervention.
So let me see if I get this right then. So the caloric restriction, which Dr. Walford was working on, is cutting down the number of calories you eat, to 1,600 or whatever. And it's arguably one of the most powerful longevity interventions of all time. Over, historically, it really works. The problem is nobody can sustain it, and you look terrible. It's very difficult to do, right? So
yeah, I will argue yes and no, right? So and based on data, right? So if you look at the mice, eventually somebody did the experiment right? So they took mice that were outbred and all kind of genetic mixing, and they showed that a third of the mice live longer on calorie restriction, a third of the mice were not affected, and a third of the mice live shorter on calorie restriction.
Oh.
And if you look at the monkey study shows that the NIA study after 25 years show no effects on lifespan at all from calorie restriction, right? And the Wisconsin study show an effect on lifespan, but a minor effect, because there seem to be a big effect on diseases like diabetes and insulin resistance, cardiovascular disease, cancer. But then overall, the lifespan extension was fairly minor, right? And so I think the reality is different from the stories that we've heard. And the reality is, yes, some people are going to probably benefit a lot from calorie restriction. Some people are going to be probably neutral to it, and some people are going to be hurt by calorie restriction. So so that's probably, and we also saw it in the monkey study. So I would say that that's probably a good way to look at it. But the important thing about calorie restriction, it tells us there is something about calorie restriction that can have a big effect on disease and lifespan. And so, I mean, our quest has been, how do we get all of this without having the problems, right? How do we get all the mice to live longer, or all the rats, and eventually all the people to live longer?
So instead of getting some live longer, some live shorter with calorie restriction, instead, you've taken the approach of fasting, where you go to essentially 0 or low calories for a short period of time, 5 days, 7 days, something like that. And now, what are the benefits of fasting? Is it the same as caloric restriction, the same types of things you talked about on a molecular level?
Yeah, as I was saying, the ones that I listed, the switch of metabolism, the autophagy, the stem cell, the Yamanaka factors, the shrinking re-expansion, all of that is from fasting and fasting mimicking diets. We used to do water-only fasting, and we still do some of it, but even the mice struggle with it. And so when we did that many years ago, the first trial at USC, in Norris Cancer Center with water-only fasting, I think eventually we had to stop that trial because it took so long. I think it went on for 10 years, right? It was so difficult to recruit people on water-only fasting, because most of the cancer patients, even though we thought they would be very motivated, they would do it, and the oncologists would go for it. And of course, the oncologists, David Quinn and Tanya Dorf, et cetera, they were very supportive, but still the reality was it was very difficult to recruit people. Patients did not want to do water-only fasting. They felt cheated by it. And so, that really gave us the motivation to apply and get funded by the NIA and the NCI, National Cancer Institute, for the fasting mimicking diet, right? So, and that's almost exclusively what we've been working on. And it's not necessarily, it's 50 to 70% calorie restricted. That's what it is. And it's only for, let's say, 4 to 7 days. Most of the times it's 5 days.
Now, when people fast for 4 to 7 days, their metabolism switches. That our audience has heard about this before, but they switch from burning glucose to primarily burning ketones. They go into what's called ketosis as a sort of healthy response to that. Now, how is fasting? What are the benefits of fasting versus the benefits of, some people go into ketosis through fasting, but some people go into ketosis through a ketogenic diet where they have low carbs and they turn mTOR down and AMP kinase up with ketogenic diet. Are there additional benefits? If someone's on a ketogenic diet, are there additional benefits for them to fast also, or are they the same thing, or similar effects rather? They're not the same thing, but do they have similar health benefits?
Well, the ketogenic diet, if you think about the very low carbohydrates, say less than 10%, or the calories coming from carbohydrates. What they did, the short-term data is very good. That's what we were talking about earlier, right? It's very good, right? So lots of benefits. The long-term data is terrible, right? So both in mice and humans, right? So if you look at the meta-analysis on ketogenic diet and longevity, I think it was a Lancet study, but there's several. It shows that it's better to have an 80% carbohydrate diet than a ketogenic diet, than a low carbohydrate ketogenic diet. And so I think that we're mixing short-term benefits with long-term benefits. And I also say, I like to look at pillars of longevity, like epidemiological studies, clinical studies, basic research, et cetera. And, so and centenarians are one of the pillars, actually. So if you look at epidemiology, the ketogenic diet is associated with a shorter lifespan. And if you look at centenarians, I never met a centenarian on a ketogenic diet. So I think that, you start putting it together. And even in the mice, if you look at the Simpson work with mice, the mice on a low carbohydrate diet did terrible, longevity-wise, right? So I think in general, low carb, high protein, right? And that's what a lot of people that do ketogenic diets have, because you have to get the calories from somewhere, right? So there are some ketogenic that are low protein, very high fat, so those are, you can argue they could be more beneficial, but I mean, yeah, in general, the longevity diet is not positive for ketogenic diets. It doesn't mean that people cannot benefit from doing short periods of ketogenic diet, but overall, I think relatively at least 40% of calories should come from carbohydrates, so those, if it's mostly plant-based, those seem to be the ideal diets.
Yeah, I could see where if you increase the protein on going a ketogenic diet, and you lower the carbs and replace it with proteins, there'd be problems with the protein. But are you saying also with people who basically keep proteins constant but lower the carbs, increase the ketones and fats, that's also problematic for long-term survival in a ketogenic diet?
Yeah, I'm saying that the overall animal-based ketogenic diet that's going to have high protein or very high protein, animal-based, and very low carbs, it's going to have tremendous benefits, because you're going to see, and that's a problem with the Atkins and all of that, for decades, that people do it and they have big benefits short term, and they fall for it, and then most of the times they regain. It's very difficult to continue, and they regain the weight and they regain the problems. But but they get the short-term benefits. And that's why it's, after 50 years, it's still around, because it has a tremendous short-term benefit. But most people will have a high protein, high animal-based proteins, and then I think they fall into what the epidemiology is showing, which is you're probably not going to live very long. It's not clear why you're not going to live very long, or you're going to live shorter. But that seems to be pretty consistent. Also, looking at the animal data and the what Simpson has done. And by the way, Simpson is the Australian lab. When you look at this, they look at all kinds of dietary combination, right? So high protein, low protein, high carb, low carb. They did not have an opinion. They look at like over 1,000 mice and lots of groups. And then they say, well, let's see which one lived the longest. And it turned out to be high carb, low protein.
And so what is it about fasting that has so many benefits to not only longevity, but chronic disease? We're seeing the fasting and turning down mTOR, and some of these are in ketosis, I guess, with the fasting, but they get benefits of cardiovascular disease, of course, type 2 diabetes, and things like cancer, and even Alzheimer's disease. What's the unifying factor? Is it the things you mentioned already, the autophagy and all that are the benefits and with fasting?
I think it's all of the above, right? So if you look at, we've done 15 years of studies on cancer, and that's one of my lab in Italy is actually focused on cancer. And usually a cycle of fasting or fasting mimicking diet is as good as a cycle of chemotherapy against the cancer cells, right? Almost in every study we've done, I mean, it's not going to cure any mouse, and just like chemotherapy, it's not going to cure the mouse, but it's going to slow down the cancer progression, right? So now, so just thinking about that is, in our hands, at least in most cancers, a cycle of fasting mimicking diet is as powerful as a cycle of chemo, with the difference that is helping the normal cells. It's killing the cancer cells, helping the normal cells, whereas the chemotherapy is damaging everything. So so that's just one of the many things that fasting does. And I think the biggest thing is the ability, especially this longer fasting mimicking diet, to distinguish between damaged cells and healthy cells. And it would not be surprising if this was an evolved role for fasting, right? So let's use fasting to determine which are the rebel cells and which are the functional ones, right? So if I fast a human being, if you're not responding to fasting, you are not normal, and so the immune system can attack you. And that's exactly what we see, right? The fasting promoting T-cell dependent attack of the cancer cells. And but it's very sophisticated, and that's why you think about an evolved process, because when you look at autoimmunity, the opposite happens, right? So it's like, if you think about cancer, the immune system becomes stronger, recognizes the cancer cell, and attacks it. And if you think about autoimmunity, the immune system gets weaker, or not generally weaker, but the cells that are attacking self are being killed preferentially, right? And then you have to say, well, how does it know how to do this? It seems very sophisticated. It cannot be coincidental, right? Yes, that's why we haven't proven it yet. It's difficult to prove that this is an evolved process, but it may be an evolved ability to go after dysfunctional components, whether it's a cell that is not working properly, you do autophagy, or you kill it, you turn on the stem cell and make a new one, right? So you have all kinds of tools to rejuvenate. And this is why we just published on 2 clinical trials showing 2.5 years of biological age reduction after 3 cycles of the fasting mimicking diet.
And so you mentioned the fasting mimicking diet a little bit, maybe before. What exactly is that? It's a diet that mimics the effects of fast. Could you explain that?
Yeah, so the lab was always focused on, since my years at UCLA with bacteria and yeast, always focused on the connection between nutrients and signaling pathways, right? So understanding what glucose does, what each amino acid does, et cetera, and what fat does, then we came up with a fasting mimicking diet, which is a low calorie, low sugar, low protein, high fat diet, and was designed and developed to match the effects of water-only fasting on several markers of what we call starvation response, right? IGF-1, IGF-BP1, glucose, and ketone bodies. That's what we're trying to match those changes up and down of those four. And then when we match it, then we consider that to be a fasting mimicking diet. What does it mean? It allows you to eat, not a lot, but allows you to eat about half of what you normally eat. And but it does so with a composition that tricks the system and allows it to enter a fasting response mode.
Yeah, so to be clear, it's different from a ketogenic diet in that it is low hypocaloric, right? So you're not 0 calories, but it's a little bit of caloric restriction. So people who are on a ketogenic diet, it's not the same as a fasting mimicking diet. You know, if you want to do that, you need to drop your calories down. Am I getting that right?
Well, it's much more that. First of all, it's a relatively high carb diet, right? The fasting mimicking diet is about 45% of the calories. It's heavily restricted in calories, but then it's about 45% carbs, 45% fats, and 10% protein. So it's very low protein. It's all plant-based protein, so extremely low levels of certain amino acids. So it's truly designed as what we call a nutri technology. Then we want for people to just be food, but it's not just food to us, right? So to us, it's trying to achieve very exact changes in the blood, in the markers in the blood. And yeah, so it's got nothing to do with the ketogenic diet, although both the ketogenic diet and the fasting mimicking diet cause elevated ketone bodies. And but in our case, we did not want these ketone bodies to get too high. So we don't want the 7 millimolar, levels of ketone bodies because we are afraid about this yo-yo ketogenesis, right? It continues up and down, right? So maybe it's being over careful, but that's how I think about the FMD, the fasting mimicking diet, is something that it should never hurt anybody. And even one person, and maybe this is impossible, but that's the way we look at it, right? It should be so carefully designed and implemented that it'd be difficult to imagine how it could hurt anybody.
Yeah, and this fasting mimicking diet is available not only for consumers, anybody can purchase it, correct? It's also available for there are variations of it now that I know you're working with some insurance companies to get reimbursement for it for certain diseases as a treatment or a supplement for that. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't, I'm just speaking as
yeah.
Professor Longo of USC.
Okay, yeah.
And so there is a company, I started a company. I'm not, I'm not hiding it. I give everything to charity. I don't take consulting from the company. I don't take, anything from the company. And, all the shares of the company, if it goes public, eventually will be donated to charity. But yeah, I always thought it was very important to have the company. And 15 years later, I'm glad I did it, because otherwise, we have so many clinical trials right now, and the company has been instrumental also in providing the kit to any hospital in the world that asks for it. And without asking too many questions, just say, go and do it, do what you want to do and do it independently. And then, hey, let's hope that it's positive. But, and that's been what I really pushed very hard for. And it's working out, right? So now we have trials on diabetes from University of Heidelberg, trials on diabetes from University of Leiden, cancer trials from many different cancer centers around the world. Stanford now is working on autoimmunity. And yeah, so it's been, I don't know, maybe over 25 trials and many more going on. And I think that without the company, that will not be impossible. And without the company, I think it would have been very difficult to then get the product out to the people in a very fairly inexpensive, but way, right? So yeah, so I'm happy that has happened, but I'm out of it, right? Meaning, like, I don't have any commercial role, or the company's run by the CEO, and yeah, so they do what they do.
Absolutely. I respect that. We'll have somebody else. We'll invite someone from the company to talk on a program, and they can go into that. But it's really amazing work that you've done, and it's being done. And how can people follow you on social media, or what's your website, Valter, if they want to hear more about the work you're doing?
Yeah, so we have two foundations, one with my name and one is called Create Cures. And then I'm on Instagram, and I don't run, I mean, I'm involved, but the foundations run them. And Instagram and Facebook, those are the major two social outlets that we run. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Valter, for this sharing, spending time with us and sharing your experiences on this. And thank you so much for the great work you're doing.
Thanks.
If you are enjoying this program, please hit that subscribe button, or even better, leave a review. Your support makes it possible for us to create the quality programming that we're continually striving for.
Can I start? Is it recording?
It's already recording.
Oh, sorry. This is for general information and educational purposes only, and it's not intended to constitute or substitute for medical advice or counseling. The practice of medicine or the provision of healthcare, diagnosis, or treatment, or the creation of a physician-patient or a clinical relationship. The use of this information is at their own user's risk. If you find this to be on the value, please hit that like button to subscribe to support the work that we do on this channel. And we take your suggestions and advice very seriously, so please let us know what you'd like to see on this channel. Thanks for watching, and we hope to see you next time. You should say that.
No, that's good. You said that. That's really good. You like it? You want to do it one more time, or is that good? I think that was good.
Yes.
All right.
You need to save the recording.
Very good.